Overview and Scrutiny Committee. First item is apologies.
We have no apologies, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Item 2, appointment of substitute members is... Hello. Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Morehouse for apologies. Item 3, declarations of interest. Anything for the agenda today? No. Okay, takes us on to item 4, minutes, to confirm the attached minutes of the meeting of the committee held on the 18th of May. Are we happy with those? Have we got a proposer and a seconder? Yep. All those in favour of the minutes? Thank you. Item 5, decisions of the Cabinet relating to recommendations. There are none. Item 6, issues referred to the committee by public petition, council, cabinet or another committee. Also none. Item 7, notice of forthcoming key decisions. So just a reminder, this is for information if there's anything specifically you want to notify that you might want in the agenda that's on there, as opposed to discussion point. Okay, take that as a no from everyone then. So we'll move on. Item 8 then, the scrutiny work programme. I believe that was circulated, that was today, Rebecca. So just as we get to grips with what's on there, did you want to say the points or do you want me to go through it?
Thank you, Chair. So this is the first meeting of the year following the AGM where we have the new work programme for consideration. In terms of the items that we have, we've broken them down this time to show you sort of the priority blocks for members to agree on sort of the priority orders. First block is water quality, St Margaret's Bay car park, council motion on potholes, and QEQM critical incident and William Harvey critical and stroke service provision was an addition to that. In terms of the water quality, the Environment Agency confirmed this afternoon that they are happy to attend. So that was a very positive step forward there. We haven't yet heard back, to my knowledge, from KCC on the potholes. I will look to see about chasing on that. The second priority block is items identified from the notice of forthcoming key decisions or schedule reports. There is in the autumn the HRA development strategy identified. This links to the sort of affordable housing programs that items have come forward on, climate change strategy and affordable housing on a case-by-case basis as previously identified. And then block 3, we have KCC community and children's hubs. In terms of the actual work programme, you'll see that on the pages there, we have filled in what already is sort of scheduled in. The chair will talk in a second about July, but I can confirm that we have confirmation from Quinn Estates that they will attend in July to speak on Betshanger Country Park in respect of that original council referral. We have the Kesney Cavern Billiards Room business plan coming back as well. There is also a significant amount potentially for the cabinet agenda in addition to that, so I'll leave it to the chair on that one. Thank you.
Okay, so you might notice on the notice of forthcoming key decisions, the majority of that is to be on the 6th of July agenda. Busy indeed. I have it on good authority that the majority of those things are going to be coming forward. I think there's something like 10 plus agenda items that are that have gone through CMT. So given that we've had notice from Betshanger that they will be sending representatives for the 13th of July meeting, I'm minded that that could well take up, you know, a couple of hours of that meeting. Typically we've allowed public speaking or extensive public speaking, and I'm happy to continue that. I think that meeting could well end up being could be an hour and a half, 2 hours talking about Betshanger, and I think that's right to do. Given that it happens to match up with what could be 10, 12 items on the cabinet agenda that I think we would want to talk about. Quite a few of those. I've been discussing with Rebecca and the directors as well about possibly having a meeting on the 13th of July that would be to discuss Betsanger Country Park, which would mean then we would have a separate meeting on the 20th of July to take the cabinet items. Purely because what I don't want to end up happening is we kind of end up saying, well, you know, we can have an hour or so to talk about Betsanger, but then we'd have to cut the debate short. Yeah, 13th Betsanger because they've confirmed, and then 20th we would take the agenda items from cabinet. Just because I think otherwise we would end up either not selecting cabinet items just to try and limit the timing of a meeting, and I don't necessarily want to do that. Alternatively, we'd have to cut the time we'd discuss Betsanger, and I don't necessarily want to do that either. So that's my proposal at the moment. Councillor Loughman.
Thank you, Chair. I'm 100% supportive of your arrangements, and thank you for ensuring that that's the case, because I am sure that there will be need for discussion regarding cabinet decisions, and Betsanger is going to create a great deal of interest, and maybe 2 hours might be optimistic.
Yeah, might be optimistic, but certainly I think we'd struggle if we had a significant number of cabinet items as well. Councillor Vincent.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think looking at my diary, I can probably do that. I need to obviously work with colleagues to make sure they could. It is a bit of a shame that only a month after our annual meeting where we agreed the scheduling meetings for this year, we found that the cabinet agenda is so stacked that we can't accommodate all of the items at the same time as doing stuff which has been in the pipeline for scrutiny for some time. I'm sure that isn't intentional, but clearly, you know, members make plans around the dates of meetings, as I know officers do, and the people we invite to appear before the committee. So we'll try and make it work on kind of at this end of the desk. But if it could be avoided in the future, I'm sure we'd all appreciate it.
Yeah, and I think obviously you'd appreciate that we don't control outside agencies or people like Betsanger, and so when they come back and agree to dates, you know, we can either accept that or we can decline them based on our own agendas. But I think in the public interest, we obviously want them to come along, don't we? So I take your point, Councillor Vincent, that yes, we didn't necessarily know this not that long ago, but this was a discussion we had about the availability of the council chamber, the availability of people like Betsanger Park, and how busy items might be. It could have been that all of those items didn't come forward. If they'd have pushed back to the next meeting, we probably would have been okay. But I think we want to try and get as much into this scrutiny committee before it can't meet anymore. And I think that was the general consensus in the last meeting, if my memory is correct. So we'll try and put those arrangements together so that as many people can meet as possible. Is there any other comments to make on the work programme, Councillor Vincent?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think, and it's great that Andy is here this evening to speak about other items, but given I'm expecting the kind of publication of the outcome of our inspection by the housing regulator relatively soon, I would imagine that's something that the committee would probably want to make sure it looks at quite quickly. So it'd be useful to make sure that that is added so that we can have a look at it in due course.
Thank you. So the outcome of the regulatory inspection is expected on the 15th of July, just for your information. So we'll have to have a conversation around how we can make that work. Clearly, we will make members aware at the day we get the notification. But yeah, we need to fit that into a scrutiny agenda or a cabinet agenda as well. So that will have to happen.
Through you, Chair, it'd be useful to understand what the process is after the publication of the inspection report, because I guess the normal schedule of meetings will mean that we won't be sitting as an overview and scrutiny committee for 2 months after the publication of the report. Now, if there's any value that we could add in kind of scrutiny of the report that could then inform a formal response that we may or may not have to submit, and then what we do in an action plan that follows, I think we'd probably want to figure out as a committee what the most appropriate time would be to look at the detail, and 2 months later feels quite a long time.
I agree with that, Chair. I mean, I think getting the regulatory outcome on the 15th of July and then having kind of the summer recess isn't particularly helpful. So we might have to have a conversation around what we can do around meetings on the back of the regulatory inspection outcome.
Okay, is there a period of time that we have to respond to that outcome, or I think that's kind of your point, isn't it? Is it time sensitive?
No, unless the report's factually inaccurate, they won't expect us to respond formally, but they will, assuming we don't get like the perfect outcome, which is unlikely. We will be expected to put together a report looking at why our weaknesses have arisen and an action plan to address them. So that will be the next step. But as Councillor Vincent said, getting members' input on that would be useful.
Okay, so I think we can have that on our list, and we can have a discussion when that comes in, because obviously depending on what the outcome is will depend on the level and nature of work that will take place, and then we can schedule that in, but it will definitely be on the list. Fine, there is some space on the work programme, but there obviously are items that we have on our priority list. Anything else for the work programme? No. Okay, happy to move on from the work programme then. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. So that takes us on to item 9, public speaking, which there is none. So item 10, adoption of affordable housing supplementary planning document. Carly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm just going to briefly talk around the affordable housing SPD adoption, and in particular just around the representations we've received following the public consultation stage, which was held for 4 weeks from the 14th of April. We reviewed all of those representations and we have made some changes. So I'm just going to briefly talk about those. They are set out in part 3 of the report as well, and quite in detail. So there was 20 representations received overall. 10 of them were actually kind of no comment ones, or provided no substantive comments in relation to affordable housing itself. Some of them had come from some of our statutory consultee colleagues, where they were acknowledging that they'd been consulted. 8 respondents expressed in principle support for the introduction of the SPD, and we did get some positive feedback welcoming the SPD, which adds clarity to policy SP5 and some of our other policies. We had comments such as flexible and pragmatic, and things like that. We did get some concerns raised with some of the content of the SPD. As I say, section 3 does set those out in detail. I'll just summarise them now. One of the comment was from a resident, and did say the SPD was too technical to understand. And we've taken that feedback on board. Obviously, the topic area itself is quite technical, and the SPD guidance note are explaining how certain parts of a policy is to be implemented. So it does have to be quite detailed technical language. So what we've thought to do is that we did publish some more simple FAQs alongside the consultation when it went out, and we're going to turn those into like an adoption FAQs. So keep a kind of plain English FAQs on the website sitting alongside the final SPD, which just in more plain English summarises what each of the guidance note is trying to do and how it relates back to SP5. There were some comments we couldn't address through any changes to the SPD, one from Dover Society, and I think one from a developer, which was more to do with the geographic nature of policy SP5 and how it applies. But that's not something we can change through an SPD because the policy itself is set in the local plan. But we did make some changes. In particular, the three kind of key changes we made was to three of the guidance notes based on the comments we got. One of them was guidance note 8, specialist housing schemes. We had incorrectly referenced some terminology relating to the term C2 uses, when actually that wasn't the intention. It was that it was trying to set out that residential institutions and older person schemes, the policy would still apply to those where they were independent dwellings. So that correction, so we've made a correction basically to set that out and make that clearer. So the policy does apply where effectively an independent unit is being created. But what we've also added is that it might be more practical in those types of schemes that they do pay us an off-site contribution towards affordable housing rather than putting it on site. For example, if it's an over 55 scheme of bungalows or something like that, it might be more appropriate for them to use the calculator. So we've made that clearer. Guidance note 9 was setting a new formula for calculating the off-site contributions where we receive them. We did get some feedback from the initial position, the initial draft document, that we hadn't set out any worked examples of how we'd come to that new calculator, and that actually it was too set in stone as well. So what we've done is we've added some worked examples to the final document. So we've shown how that we've got to that calculation of 10% GDV in the document. But we have also amended the note where we will allow for site promoters to submit if they think that that doesn't work for them and that it's overestimating, that they can put in a site-specific calculation that we would then analyse ourselves if their data is slightly different, because obviously we do have to accept that there's different values in different parts of our district, and that objection to that was quite strong. So we decided to add a little bit of flexibility in there. Guidance note 10 on deferred contributions. So this is effectively the clawback mechanism for where we have allowed, say we've accepted a viability argument that they haven't provided any contribution. There'll be something in their section 106 that says actually you need to evaluate your scheme at the end, and if you have made more money than you originally said you were going to, you need to pay it back to us. The original draft document said that if the sales value lifted at 10%, they had to pay 60% of that uplift to us. We had quite a lot of pushback from that from some of the local developers, again suggesting that we didn't have evidence of those specific amounts. So again, we amended this to take into account revenue and costs, so that they effectively can submit a full viability appraisal again. So rather than just looking at sales value uplift, if they want to, they can submit a full viability appraisal to show an uplift in profits achieved. And where that is then achieved, they'll then need to pay 100% to us. So they're the key kind of edits we've made to the document in response to the representations. We made other tweaks here and there, just tidying language up, things like that. Hopefully we've made things clearer. One of the things we've made clearer is the designated rural areas. We made the maps larger and a bit more of an explanation about the legislation that sets those. It's 1997 legislation. It is a little bit out of date, but it does still apply. So we've just tried to explain that a little bit more clearly. So I think that's all the changes we've made. I'm happy to take any other questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Carly. Councillor Loughman.
First and foremost, can I congratulate you on this paper? I think it's excellent and the improvements are noted. Although it's probably a matter of technology, but the table on page 157 is very blurred and I couldn't read it. And on page 11, the third bullet point spells Surrey, but without the E. And just a minor point, just picking up tradition. I just thought I'd get that one in early, Councillor Vincent. Anyway.
Sorry, could I just interrupt, Councillor Loughman? Could you just quote those page references to me again, just so that I can...
Page 11, third bullet point is the Surrey thing. And page 157, at the bottom of the page, there's a table. And it's probably the technology, but the table was blurred, so I couldn't see it clearly. And I suspect others may not. I think there's a number of things that,
Screening.
you know, I'm thoroughly supportive of. There's a balance that is needed when it comes to affordable housing between the RPs and our community interest. And I think that there's a great amount of clarification that's ever so good. But there's a couple of points that I would wish to raise, primarily relating to viability. One of the things, given the comment regarding technical language, I fear for anyone listening on online or seeing online, as you say, technicality is, I'm afraid, impossible to escape from when it comes to this subject. But viability is something that I know there's a link in the paper to viability and what it means. But I think that it's quite important for folk to understand, because there are certain instances, for example, guidance note 2C, there's a waiving of the need of viability appraisal. And on page 60, the guidance note 5D, that where costs are marginal, certain things can be flexible. And I appreciate flexibility is vital, because what we want are affordable housing in this community. So please don't confuse what I'm saying with anything else other than that priority. But when it comes to whether it's rural housing, specialist housing schemes, if viability appraisal is flexibilized, let's say, where are the compromises? So, for example, if I was considering M43 and I lived in a rural community, are we saying that a kind of flexibility there might not have that because of the nature of the affordability, etc.? So I think viability and the flexible arrangements need clarification. If not for me, for those of us and the community to understand, if we're going to get a benefit from affordable housing, exactly sometimes the cost. Am I relatively clear?
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. So yeah, there are some definitions in the document where we've tried to make that clear. I think when we talk about flexibility in here, though, when we're talking about viability appraisal, the guidance note is making clear what we're going to be flexible on. So when you say things like we won't, it wouldn't be to then reduce the requirements for, say, build standards. So the guidance note on build standards is set. The guidance on viability appraisals and what we expect to see is set out in its own guidance note in here in quite a lot of detail. So that was setting out, covers basically what national policy would require, but we've set some specific parameters as well about what we expect to see. And there's a new appendix at the back as well, which allows for a joint viability appraisal approach, which received quite a lot of support actually in the consultation. But when it comes to then balancing of what happens if a viability argument is made, that would be, as now, on a kind of case-by-case basis. So there's nothing in this SPD that's setting out what we would change in a viability basis, because we can't do that, because obviously each case is going to be very specific. There is a mention in here that obviously there are other developer contributions as well that can come into play. Quite often, though, the amount needed for affordable housing is so vastly different to the requirements for other types of infrastructure that they're not normally balanced against each other. And yeah, a viability appraisal wouldn't normally knock out the need for, say, build standards. What it would do is do what it does in here, which is ask them to go through the different options. So policy SP5 is already very specific. So it'll be, okay, you might have a viability issue on site, but firstly, what we want you to do is, can you achieve 30% on site by changing some of the tenures? Does that make your viability better? Can you then reduce it slightly on site and still put some on site but not all? And does that make it viable? So there's all these options in SP5 already, and then the SPD makes that clear about what we'd expect to see. And then those final options are provide, a mix of those options as well, not just looking at one thing. Also then going to off-site contribution. and then deferred contributions is that last option. So SP5 already sets that out, and this SPD is not trying to change that, it's just adding a bit more detail.
Thank you very much indeed, because it's such an important issue, this, and it's good to have as much clarification and concentration on this so that others, all those online and more, can appreciate.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Rose, and then Councillor Friend.
Thank you, Chair. First one is just want to check a potential typo on 168. And at the bottom there, it states advance equality of opportunity between persons who share a relevant protected characteristic and persons who do not. But the next one says foster good relations between persons who share a relevant protected characteristic and persons who do not share it. Should it not just say do not?
I've just got to that bit of the report. So that's the equality impact assessment that
Yeah,
reports the document.
Correct.
That's a standard template. So I'd probably have to go back to the person that drafted that.
I think you need to look at that, yeah, because it's a bit weird.
Yeah, I think that is the correct wording. Yeah, that's the standard template from the equality officer, I believe.
A person, so in one instance it's do not, and then in the next instance who do not share it.
Obviously, the equality team report to me. In terms of the wording, that is the standardised wording we've used for many years in respect of the equality impact assessment. I don't think a particularly lot hinges on the actual wording there. We can certainly have a look at it, but I think it's relatively clear in what he's actually asking for, I would say, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And another thing, because under equality we don't have explicit quotas, it's kind of a no-no. I just wanted to check within this document, are we going to be looking at a rotation system where people who've been in bed sits for a long while are going to be given a prop up the ladder into housing, whilst others have only just gone on to housing and then swapped round into bed sits? So we've got a rotation that looks fair.
This document doesn't actually deal with any of those issues. So this document's a planning department document, which is dealing with new affordable housing being provided on schemes being delivered through the planning system. When it actually comes to who occupies those dwellings and waiting lists and things like that, that would be dealt with by the housing team. So that's not dealt with at all by the planning department side of things or this document. So if the council department bought some of these, when they are delivered, they would use their own policies to allocate the housing units.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Friend.
Thank you, Chair. Following on from Councillor Loughman, will every time guidance note 2 is used and there are variations agreed to, will there be an annual report that will outline what the original compliant tenure mix was and what the final agreed tenure mix will be? And in a similar fashion, on guidance note 9, with the 10% GDV, I suppose I'm looking, will there be an annual infrastructure funding statement style breakdown of what the contributions were that we received, how they were allocated and spent? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So with regards to the tenure mix, that would form part of the authority monitoring report. So there's already an indicator in the authority monitoring report that talks about affordable housing units secured every year. So what I don't think it explicitly obviously adds at the moment about tenure mix changes, but I can certainly add that in, that we could list the applications where that has changed. That wouldn't be a problem at all. So I'll make a note to do that. So that would be covered by authority monitoring report. With regards to section 106 funds received, that would all be in the IFS anyway, so it already has its own section. So you can see on every planning application exactly how many contributions have been received, and when they are spent, that also now sets out on those new dashboards where it has been spent. I think maybe what you're asking for though is if we don't receive the 10%, is that what you're asking for? If it's not the 10% GDV, how would we report it?
Both as well. I was looking for a separate statement that would entirely comprise what we received from those GDV contributions.
Yeah, well, so like I say, the IFS it does already do all affordable housing contributions, so that would just stay in that same section. There's a whole section of that, and you can filter the IFS now to particularly report just on affordable housing. What we would be able to look at doing, though, and I will speak to the head of department about this, is whether we could add something either into the AMR IFS to set out if we have accepted one of those case-by-case basis reductions. Obviously, that would normally go through, if it had a Section 106 agreement in particular, it possibly has already gone through planning committee and that type of thing to make the decision. But yeah, there's probably a way we could identify which planning applications that's applied to, and we could somehow highlight that in the IFS. But I'll take that away if that's okay, and work out exactly how we might be able to monitor that.
Because I guess the point there is that SP5 of the local plan sets out a tenure mix. If we're deviating from that, are we monitoring that is happening? That's the point, isn't it? So if we're just letting, if an application deviates from that, we must surely be recording that has happened, and therefore, if it comes back later that that's happening more often than not, we must as an authority be knowing that, mustn't we? So yeah, it'd be good to know that is happening.
Yeah, I'll definitely take that away. It probably would be picked up in different ways, but not in a singular place, because obviously we do our local authority housing statistic return, other government returns, so it would be picked up in that, but not explicitly how it's been asked for. But yeah, I think it can probably all be covered in our authority monitoring report. I just need to think about the exact wording and how we get the data.
Okay, great. Councillor Richardson and then Vincent.
Thank you, Chairman. And again, following on from the viability, Councillor Loughman comes saying, are you confident that increasing the off-site contributions won't discourage development or increase viability challenges?
Yeah, I think we don't feel like it would cause the viability issue in the, to go to off-site contributions, they would already be raising a viability argument with us. So they already would have had to have thought the scheme was unviable to even start looking at the off-site calculator. So I don't think it would lead to more of that. I also think the flexibility that we're proposing in, say, guidance note 2, with giving them more flexibility to change around with tenure mixes and things, is actually more encouraging to them. It's not set in stone that they can't move away from SP5 tenure mixes and they have to go straight to viability appraisal anymore. So I actually think, and the feedback we got from the consultation was that was they were quite supportive of that approach. I mean, in general terms, obviously a developer's not going to like paying more money, but our evidence, we've worked on the evidence with the housing department, and obviously they're the ones that are then providing those units off site, and national policy and SP5 requires them to give us an amount that provides the same amount of affordable housing off site. So we're not moving away from that approach. It's just updating that approach to be accurate.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Vincent.
Thank you, Chairman. So just building on some of the points that have been made just now, I've got 3 questions for you, colleagues. So just on the measurement point, through you, Chair, Councillor Friend talked about the annual monitoring report and where this data was presented. Now, although government have changed our overall targets for house building a bit in recent times, have we made an assessment of what the number is that we think we should be getting of the 500 and whatever a year, or whatever the current number is, that should be affordable under the criteria? And does that appear in the report? So I understand that we've got the detail of all of the different developments and where they're happening, but do we say 550 were built in this year, of which 150 meet the description of affordable under this policy?
Yeah, so the AMR already does that. So the authority monitoring report, when we have our completions and we say that we've built this many this year, this many of them would have been in affordable tenures. So that's already doing that. And probably what we will, just thinking about what we were just talking about, we might need to break it down more into the different tenures of that. I think we do anyway. What's tricky sometimes, which you'll all be aware of, is obviously when it's an outline consent that's been granted, we don't know the details. So it probably depends. Sometimes we report on applications granted and sometimes we report on development completed. So it might be that only at development completed stage we'd be able to report on the final tenure that was built.
Yeah, I think that would make sense given the number of extant permissions that haven't been built out yet. And I'll come on to ask about viability in a second, if I may. One of the things that I think you mentioned in the consultation responses we'd had, again through you, Chair, related to the fact that we've got these different descriptions of so different policy requirements depending on the location in the district, which is a long-standing policy. So particularly the Dover urban area, which is mapped out in the policy document with no requirement to deliver affordable housing. And it's a timely publication. I think that in the last couple of days, we've seen the annual kind of house price data published by the VOA or whoever is responsible for publishing it. And Dover town has got the lowest house prices in Kent, which it has for a long period of time. So that hangs together for me in lots of ways, because the housing itself is arguably quite affordable. What I'm interested to understand is whether or not we've ever done an assessment of the delivery of what we would consider to be affordable housing, which is that it is affordable rent, social housing, or first homes, or whatever other criteria we apply, and whether or not what might be, I guess, arguably cheaper housing, which is delivered in Dover particularly, has the same level of that sort of mix of tenure types and opportunities. Because I suppose what I see being a potential risk is that you have low cost housing in Dover where there are no requirements around affordable housing in the policy, but less provision by registered providers and all of the other tenure types that might exist. Now, that may not be the case, but I don't know whether I didn't see in the I didn't see within the SPD that had been explained clearly, and I don't know, I can't recall whether or not it was explained, that analysis was done for the local plan. But do we have an idea of delivery around those two geographic areas to test whether or not there are some unexpected outcomes for affordable housing in Dover in particular?
So you're right, it's not in the SPD, because I say the SPD is just adding to policy SP5, which is our policy basis. So at the local plan examination, obviously that evidence was examined, and that came from some viability work and housing needs assessment work that was done all to support the local plan, and that's what defined that urban area based on viability as a low value area. So basically, and quite often, obviously, as we know, is like brownfield development as well is more costly to develop and things like that. So that decision was made at that time based on that. What we did do is set out in the examination that actually sometimes affordable housing is still coming forward in the Dover urban area without the policy, because you'll probably be aware some of the schemes that have come forward have been from Homes England, and the housing department here, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but the housing department here have also delivered some of the schemes in that area as well. So there's definitely some delivery. I wouldn't be able to give you a breakdown, but I think possibly the housing department would be able to detail that. There has been some delivery of what would be affordable tenures in the Dover urban area just through the different types of development. It's just that SP5 doesn't require the developers to actually to put it on site, but that it doesn't stop people putting that provision on site.
Thank you for that explanation. The reason I'm asking the question is because what I want to understand is whether or not, I mean, we're considering the policy document here, but I guess we've got the policy for a reason. And I'm in line with what Councillor Friend was asking, trying to understand whether or not we've got a really good handle as to whether or not the policies we have in place are delivering what we're after. So we might have lower cost housing being delivered in Dover. And I know we all know in this room in practice, we can recall examples of schemes which would meet those criteria, which have been delivered in the Dover urban area. But what I don't know is whether or not we're measuring to say that actually we are introducing some slightly odd outcomes by dint of the market having more freedom to deliver whatever tenure type it chooses within that area. So which could potentially lead to a shortfall in provision based on what we're trying to achieve. So it might be lower cost, but it might not be affordable rent, it might not be social housing, it might not be first homes or whatever else. It feels like it would be a reasonable thing for just to make sure that we were measuring, even if it wasn't something that was kind of a specific requirement of the policy, just so that we could ensure that we weren't, you know, inadvertently failing to deliver loads of that sort of housing in the Dover urban area.
Yeah, so as I say, we do collect the data. So tenure mix is something we collect through the monitoring we do on completions. So where we do know the tenure mix of the units, we could break that down. It's all monitored by parish and area. And when we do a local plan review, obviously reviewing your current policies and how they're working is something you start with. So local plan review would review all of that evidence as well. But yeah, I think with the reporting we do already through the AMR and the LARS, we're probably already getting all of that data on tenure mixes. And the tenure mix changes we're allowing through the flexibility here of Guidance Note 2 is really in line with national policy changes. So you'll probably be aware one of the reasons we're being flexible is because first homes has kind of been dropped nationally as a requirement. So although our local plan evidence does say we had a need for first homes, we feel like we don't need to push that so much now because it's a product is not being promoted so much by the government. And our housing team here and the strategic housing market assessment undertaken for the local plan actually identified a really big need for shared ownership. So that flexibility we've decided to go with in Guidance Note 2 is still evidence-based.
So final question from me really is about the viability point that Councillor Richardson made. I suppose there are obviously, as well as within Dover, lots of bits of the country which don't have an affordable housing kind of obligation on developers, and the kind of that I have read in kind of assessments of some of those areas that they've been able to free up significant amounts of delivery because they've removed some of the things that could arguably be a friction to developers who ultimately have a choice about where they invest. So what I have in mind is the fact that we've got a number of strategic sites like the Whitfield Urban Extension site in the round, which is being developed and delivered much more slowly than originally anticipated. And I'm curious to understand whether or not we, through our understanding and conversations with developers, see ourselves as a good place to develop for housing developments relative to others. Because it feels to me like if you've got a limited amount of working capital as a housing developer, you will go to the places where you feel like you are going to be able to make the most return. And we know that I think we're above our kind of 5-year housing land supply at the moment, but have been flying pretty close to the wind, sailing pretty close to the wind for some time on it. And with the targets moving around, it's not difficult to imagine a scenario where we'd be falling short. Now, the housing delivery, that market in housing delivery is unbelievably stagnant at the moment, and there are loads of stalled developments within our district, in other parts of Kent. At what point, I suppose my question, at what point would we reflect on the additional burdens which we sort of place on developers, which we think are well intentioned to deliver the right mix of housing within the district, and say this isn't working, in that no housing is the most expensive form of housing. Okay, so if there are developments which we're expecting to come forward which simply aren't because they can't make the numbers add up because of materials inflation and so on and so forth, how nimble can we be to say actually we need to step in and remove some of these things because it's not working, rather than waiting for a local plan review in years down the road when we might have missed out on years and years of delivery?
Yeah, thank you. So I just touch initially on delivery. You're right, we have got a 5-year land supply. Compared to some of our neighbours, we're in a very good position here, actually. The team's just finished the completion count and it's higher than we've had for several years. So there's no signs at the moment for us in particular that delivery is an issue. We've got several planning applications and several sites moving forward, which again we're looking at now as part of updating the land supply report. So we're in the process of doing that now. But what already covers that is the fact that SP5 already allows them to go through those options. So deferred contributions obviously is the final option. So if someone is putting in a viability appraisal and saying we want to build here but we can't make any money unless we don't give you any, and that deferred contributions approach doesn't just apply to affordable housing, it applies to all of their infrastructure. So policy SP11 in the local plan has that same caveat as the SP5 does. So if they can show to us in a verified independent report that they want to bring a scheme forward and it can't deliver its affordable housing or its contributions, then we would still permit it on that basis, and we probably would just have that deferred contributions clause in, that we would have a clawback mechanism if they do make more sales value than they anticipated they would. So we've already got that kind of get out clause without needing to change the policy, because our policy's already got that flexibility in it.
I appreciate I'm taking up a bit of time here, but to what extent, obviously these permissions expire after a certain period of time if works haven't commenced. So to what extent do we as a kind of an officer team here manage the application after it's granted, sort of check in to say, look, you've not done anything yet? Like 2 years after, you know, the permission is granted, to say, look, it's going to expire. Why haven't you started? Because most of these that are granted in places that fit within the sort of sites that we've identified within the local plan are things we want to see brought forward. And frankly, if we don't see them brought forward, then the delivery stuff falls below the threshold where we start losing control of making decisions on planning applications, full stop. So could you help me understand how we manage that without, you know, developers thinking, well, all we need to do is sit on our hands and they'll come to us and start chopping requirements off? How do we manage that to ensure things get delivered?
Yeah, so just as part of the land supply work, one of the things we do is we write to everyone that's got all the major sites that have got consent, and ask for updates on their expected phasing, if there's any barriers to delivery and anything like that. So we are asking them up front to respond to a survey that we send out annually. We sent it out in April this year. So it coincided with when we do the count for the monitoring year. Quite a few do respond to that. So they'll give us their anticipated phasing for the site they've got going. If it's an outline, we'll ask them when they're expecting to submit their reserve matters. Obviously, like you say, there's deadlines for that. They normally only have 2 years to submit their reserve matters if they've got outline consent. So there's a way they can identify problems with us through that survey. And quite a lot of them do. And obviously they can put in amended applications at any time while their permission is extant, so they can put in section 73s or new applications. And if there is a viability issue between when they got it granted before, they can submit that request, and they can also submit things like deed of variation requests for their section 106 contributions as well, if that's something that's changed. Again, they'd need to provide the viability evidence to do that. So there's a number of ways, but yeah, we do actively encourage them to respond to our annual survey. Quite a few of them do. They don't all respond, but quite a few of them do. And yeah, some of the specific questions are in there about barriers to delivery, so that we could contact them and try and find out what's going on if the site's not moving.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Friend, and then I think I've got everyone who's.
Thank you, Chair. Just a really quick one. Guidance note 4, in relation to the requirement to evidence the marketing of the units to 5 registered providers. Just wondered how we landed on 5. Is that statutory? Is that good practice? Is that what our neighbours do? Or
it's not what our neighbours do. It's a bit of a new approach actually that we're going with. It was based on really conversations with our own housing department here. So obviously our housing department also operate as a registered provider. And sometimes in the planning department and the housing department, so we're getting kind of different messages sometimes from the developers about their scheme, and whether units were kind of possible to take on. The housing department thought that actually getting responses from all 10 from 10 would be useful, which I think was our initial consultation approach, was 10. Based on feedback we got, we've reduced that to 5, but that includes their council's housing team, so it's 4 others as well as the housing team. The housing team are really good here at responding to people, and they want to see the sites, and obviously, as you know, they're quite proactive in making offers as well on units that they can bring forward. So yeah, I mean, it's not really based on anything other than just conversations we've had. We've had quite a lot of RPs operating in the district, way more than 5. I think the number is, our average is, I think, something, you know, between 12 and 15 operators. So I think we thought that asking for responses from 5, including the council, and that wasn't unreasonable if that developer wants us to go with a different approach. So again, they don't have to do that approach. They don't have to try and run a practicality argument, but that's coming up more and more. So we thought, well, actually, if you want to run a practicality argument, we need something from you to show that that's true. And if it is true, then we'll try and help you. That's basically what that's about.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Loughman.
Thank you, Chair. Not to lengthen things more than they need. One comment that you received, I'm very glad you rejected, because it was suggesting that we wait for the new NPPF to arrive before implementing this, as if the deadline wasn't aware. But are there any sort of soundings from the new MPPF that impact on this, and in the event that we don't know and there may be an impact, where will we take what impact?
I mean, initial reading of the consultation documents that came out earlier in the year were really a bit of a same approach as we're taking. Actually, there is a national issue with sometimes with delivery of affordable housing or delivery of housing in general. So the MPPF was indicating, some more practical solutions need to be found, some more flexible, pragmatic approaches, which is what we're trying to achieve here. I think having affordable housing, they're not going to move away from a requirement from affordable housing. That's not the indication I get at all, where there might be some changes to tenure mixes again. But I don't think there's nothing indicating to me that our policy SB5 would be kind of irrelevant. We still have all the evidence to back that up. And what would happen is if there is something slightly conflicting with the local plan in any way, whether it be policy SB5, it'll all just be part of that planning balance, the same as it would be in any other circumstance. So once we see those changes, as officers and planning committee make decisions, they'll need to weigh the differences between and the weight between the new MPPF, the SPD and the policy, and go with a balanced argument in their decision.
Okay, don't forget you'll have another opportunity to discuss this at full council. So if you think of anything else between now and the 24th of June, is that right? You'll be able to raise your points then. So are we happy to note the report for this evening, councillors? Thank you very much. Thank you, Carly. Okay, that takes us on to our final item. Item 11, the quarterly complaints report, 4th quarter 2025-26. Rebecca.
Thank you, Chair. The report before you sets out the performance of complaints against a number of metrics for quarter 4 25-26, as well as additionally providing the opportunity at the end of year for a review of performance across the whole of the year 25-26. It should be noted that as a proportion of overall contacts with the council, complaints remain relatively low. As part of compiling the Q4 data, we've taken the opportunity to review the entire year of complaints data as part of the works undertaken with the database in late 25 and early 26, and this has provided us with the most detailed information for complaints that we have ever possessed. This data will be used to benchmark performance for the future and provides confidence in the improvements that we've made to the database during 25-26. The report sets out performance in detail, so I'll just identify a few key points from the report. For stage 1 at quarter 4, complaints were down year on year slightly, 134 v 152 the previous year, although for the year overall, we are slightly up at 509 complaints v 473 last year. We have for the first time broken down the figures into housing services, which is defined as those under the Housing Ombudsman, repairs, management and rents, and all other services, which includes housing options and private sector housing. These ones are covered, the latter ones, by the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman. We have also provided a monthly breakdown of complaints at Table 1. This shows approximately 40% of Stage 1 complaints related to housing services under the Housing Ombudsman. This number remains low when you consider against the size of the Council's housing stock. And again, the number of contacts the Council has regularly with tenants. For quarter 4, Stage 2 complaints in Q4 were flat year on year, although they were up overall, 114 v 84 in the previous year. This has reduced the ratio of Stage 1 complaints that progress from Stage 2 from 6:1 to 4:1. As you'll see from the table, paragraph 4.6, number of Stage 2 complaints is still relatively low. We have, during the course of the year, made it clearer how to escalate to Stage 2, including the adoption of standardised wordings across all services, and this may well have been a factor in the increase. We are obviously keen to make it as easy as possible, not just to make a complaint, but to escalate a complaint if required. We are going to have a carefully monitor this performance to see whether this is part of an ongoing trend in respect to Stage 2 complaints, and quarter 1 26-27 will show if there is a trend emerging in terms of the number of complaints progressing to Stage 2. The picture with the two ombudsmen remains positive, with just 2 findings against the council for the year, although both of those were determined in Q4. It should be noted that while one of the Housing Ombudsman decisions related to a complaint first made in this year, the other originates from a complaint made in late 2023. In respect of the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman, no cases progressed beyond initial assessment stages during the year. The details of the 2 findings from the Housing Ombudsman are set out at paragraph 8.3. Full details of those complaints determinations will be published to the Ombudsman website in due course. In terms of acknowledgement times, all complaints received through the web portal were acknowledged within the required 5 working days. However, on reviewing the data for 25-26, we have identified a small number of complaints that were not acknowledged within the 5 working days. These all originated from contact methods outside of the web portal, and we're working with the relevant services to stop this from reoccurring. In terms of response time, the headline story for Q4 is the return to compliance with complaints answered within 10 working days or with an extension for housing services. This is a significant achievement and fitting reward for the hard work put in by the housing teams during the course of the year. We remain confident that this has been embedded and hopefully this will be borne out further in Q1 26-27. While there has been an increase in non-compliance for non-housing services response times, these have all been discussed with the services concerned. And analysis of these has demonstrated these were preventable incidents, and the complaints team has discussed the issues in each case with the services concerned. In terms of the reasons for complaints, at paragraph 6.4 on page 183 sets out the top 5 themes, the reasons for complaints during the course of the year. It's encouraging to see that heating hot water complaints were slightly down from Q4, despite Q4 being the coldest months. Additionally, the majority of these heating hot water complaints were resolved at stage 1, with only 2 progressing to stage 2. For the number 1 complaint area, failure to provide an acceptable service, 56.67% of those complaints were not upheld, which again is encouraging. In terms of outcomes, at stage 1 for Q4, non-housing services, 58.87% of the complaints were not upheld. This is within the typical range of 40-60% seen throughout the year for these services. For Q4 housing services, the not upheld level increased to 23% from the previous quarter of 15%. Due to the nature of housing repairs, we would expect to see more complaints to be upheld, as actions to fix issues will have physical consequences if they fail. In most cases where the complaint was upheld or partly upheld, the outcome was an agreed action to put things right. In terms of the future, we're working with housing repairs on improving the management of contractor complaints. Once these improvements are embedded, we will be looking to roll those out corporate-wide, because we think that's an area where we can do better in terms of contract management and liaison, not just for housing, but for beyond. I think it's an area where, for example, with Partnership One, with the volume of complaints they get in terms of sort of contacts through council tax, it's an area where we've been working with them on improvements and identifying complaints early so that we can identify them and put through the system. The other thing we'll be looking at for 26-27 is more detailed reporting on compensation, where the council has paid out compensation or its contract has paid out compensation. The work we did this year has put in the fields we need for those, so we have through Q4 started to capture that data. For Q1 we'll have a complete set of data on that, which we'll be able to report on as well. So that, Chairman, is in summary the complaints report. Happy to take any questions.
Excellent. We'll have more data to look at. Fantastic. Councillor Williams and then Councillor Friend.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't get that to work. I'm interested in the contractors and the relationship between DDC and the contractors when a complaint is made. Because we've got Mears for housing repairs, we've got presumably somebody in the gas board for heating and hot water, Viola for waste, and we've got Partnership One, although I'm not sure if that's classified as a contractor because we're sort of working with them. So what are the processes these complaints actually make, and who has responsibility, and who oversees these? And if a contractor has broken part of the contract, what happens then? Can we change the contract partway through, or what?
So in terms of the contractors, I mean, Partnership One, you're correct, it's a LATCO, so it is slightly different from the others. However, with Partnership One, as you'd appreciate, the volume of contacts they get in respect of council tax and business rates is very high. So the conversations we had with them was about the importance of triaging the contacts they get so they can identify where it's a complaint rather than just a comment or a general sort of first stage contact. What we're looking for is to extract any complaints they receive, because obviously at the moment the complaint hits Partnership 1, we've got 5 working days to acknowledge it. So that was a big piece of work we did with them in sort of late Q3. I have to say they've taken it very well, and I think it's a very positive relationship that's been built there. In terms of contractors for sort of the housing repairs, the likes of Mears, etc., there are regular meetings between the service and the contractors. The service is the owner of the complaint. The council is the owner of the complaint. Complaint is with the council. They liaise with the contractors. The work we're doing with this is to ensure that, again, standardised processes and wording is used throughout so that it's consistent in application. We have picked Mears as the first one we're working with. And obviously, once we've got that embedded, we'll start to roll out to others. So I think we will see how it's going once we start to sort of roll this out further. But I don't think we're talking a large amount of problems. We just want to be as completely on top of it as we can be. It's an area where we want to ensure that, regardless of whether it's Veolia, Partnership 1 or Mears, that the same approach is being rolled out across the council and the same approach taken. So that will be something that in terms of sort of Q1, we should hopefully start to see. If there is any issue, I'm not expecting any significant issue, but again, as we did with the stage 1 response, introduce standardised wording, ensuring everybody's saying the same thing always helps, because obviously with the Ombudsman, they expect to see escalation processes followed. So it's just ensuring that, but the council remains the owner of the issue. In regards to sort of contractor management and requirements, you'd probably have to speak to the individual services about that. Each contract is going to be different. I don't know what the contract around Veolia is or Mears or whatever. So if you'd like to speak to the relevant heads of service, I'm sure they can advise you what their processes are in respect of contract management. So I think that covers it, Chair.
Okay. Did you want to come back, Councillor Williams, or does that answer your question?
Sort of answered it, because it was more about, can you change the contract when, when there's a group of problems in one area, the contract might need changing. I don't know whether.
Yeah, I think the point Rebecca's making that's not a one size fits all answer. So if you want to know the answers to that, you'd have to go to each head of service, because the answer for Veolia might be different to the answer for Mears, I think, is the point, unless you're going to correct me.
Chair, if I may, I mean, if a contractor isn't performing, and this is a general point, I'm not talking about specific contracts, but if a contractor isn't performing, there are normally clauses within the contract around enforcement. But in terms, it's a scale. There's a scale of non-performance, I guess, which would trigger action. So if a contractor is dealing badly with complaints, that's unlikely to trigger enforcement action unless it's persistent and sort of a fairly large scale, I would say. But Rebecca's right. If you want more detail, you need to talk to the various David Parish or Emma Jane or whatever. They'll give you more detail around the specific contracts that you've mentioned.
Councillor Friend.
Thank you, Chair. All 7 contractor behaviour complaints were upheld. Just wondered what we were doing as a council in terms of working with our partners to, readdress what minimum service levels and expectations are, and how we monitor and report that back.
So one of the things we ask all the services as part of complaints is to advise us of any lessons learned from it. So we expect every complaint to be a learning experience. We expect every complaint to bed things in. If you identify an issue, tackle the issue through the complaint and ensure that it doesn't happen down the road. Now, obviously, in terms of complaints, there may be several simultaneously, so you can't say it's going to be instant, but that's what we're looking for. And one of the things, obviously, we built into the report is about lessons learned. We're also obviously trying to track the reasons and themes and look at the outcomes of those. So, for example, the recent sort of tracking of the heating hot water issues, we could see that rise and rise and rise, and then it's obviously leveled off in the colder months, and sort of tallies with the expectations that we're seeing from the service that we've sort of turned the corner on that one. I think persistent sort of negative indications would indicate that we're failing to learn those lessons. And in those cases, I think we'd be looking to get the head of service to sort of add something to the report to explain where there was an ongoing issue that needed to be dealt with, much as David Parish provided an update a couple of quarters ago on heating hot water.
I guess we've got to put it in context though, haven't we? Because on the hot water one, I suppose to some extent, would we expect in the colder months, we would not expect, because we don't want anyone to be complaining, but just because you get multiple in, it doesn't necessarily mean there's an issue. It just means that people are complaining about their hot water, I suppose, doesn't it? Yeah. Councillor Friend, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, no, my only concern would be that, we had 7 actual complaints, but, how many people experienced bad service or that didn't make a complaint? It's probably, the number is probably eye-watering.
One of the things we're looking to do is on the housing side in September is to meet with the tenants group. We're going to present to them the year in review in terms of housing complaints. One of the questions that we're asking them is what is the best way to publicise the complaints policy to tenants? Obviously, we've got view, housing officers have got views, but we think that probably the easiest way to get a matter that works is to speak to the tenants and find out what in their view is the best way. And depending on what they say, we can look to roll that out to try and tackle, because as you say, if there are any unreported complaints, we don't want those. We want to get everything through the system that we can.
And I suppose it's considering as well, specifically for housing tenants, if they make a complaint related to where they live, they are identifying themselves to some extent, aren't they? And I imagine that's always difficult. Andy, you want to come in?
I do think it's worth kind of remembering the satisfaction levels that we're achieving within the housing service. So the overall level of satisfaction with the housing service is about 78% off the top of my head for 25, 26. But there is definitely an issue, and we discussed this, didn't we, Rebecca, with the regulator, that people aren't very happy. Our tenants aren't very happy with the the complaints service. That's about 36% off the top of my head. And there is definitely an issue, more an education piece by the sound of it, to do, because people are saying we're not happy with the way you've handled my complaint. But actually, when we've analysed that, most of those people, if not all of them, haven't actually registered a formal complaint in the financial year. So we need to do some work around that, and we do acknowledge that needs to be done.
Really quick one, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, obviously the report says the complaints remain low compared with interactions, but all the guidance I've seen from the Ombudsman warns that low complaint volumes are not automatically positive. I'm just wondering how, as a council, we test whether residents, particularly tenants, actually know how to complain and are able to trust the process.
Okay. So we have worked with the housing service to promote the process through tenants' newsletters, things like that. And I think, part of the frustration is that in terms of satisfaction, these weren't people that had been through the process that we were able to sort of point to a negative outcome from. I think we obviously can do better. And that's why one of the reasons why we're going to meet with the tenants group, obviously by advising them a sort of performance of our complaints process. If they say that that doesn't match their expectations or understanding, then that will give us something further to look at. So obviously sort of presenting to them in September isn't going to be the end of the process. It's the start of the process with engagement. And obviously we want to drive higher satisfaction. I would say that obviously in terms of a complaint made, then obviously we want to see that satisfactorily sort of resolved. That's been sort of what we've been tracking, is what comes into us and what comes out. But obviously, I take your point, low complaints in of itself isn't necessarily a positive thing. What we want to do is get all of complaints. Now, whether that's 2 or 200, we want to get all complaints, and that way all the issues are dealt with, and hopefully everybody is happy with the outcomes.
Councillor Richardson and then Councillor Vincent.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to Rebecca. While complaints remain relatively low, we've seen an increase of stage 1 complaints and stage 2 complaints, which have risen by over 35%. I'm just trying to look through what is the driving force behind the increase in stage 2 complaints by 35%?
In terms of stage 2, it's fair to say that we have issues that spike, for example, with planning committee. The decisions you make as members do have consequences for the complaints process. We are for Q1 expecting to see a significant spike. To give you an example, following the recent Kingsdown Ringwold, we had just over 50 stage 1 complaints. 20, I think 5 of those or 26 went to stage 2. Many of those were very similar in terms of their structure, in terms of the complaint. So that can be a trigger. And you do see, as the details show, that failure to provide an acceptable service is a very broad category. But that's sort of where we're sort of the main area of complaint. What we have been looking at is breaking down those categories further. We started out with 85 themes. I think we're up to 92 at the moment. So we are looking to try and get that more comprehensive data capture. I think also there has been, as we promoted how to escalate in a very consistent way in the stage 1, we have seen some take up through that. And I think that's a positive. I think if we're clearly stating to people how to escalate, then that is a positive. I think also if you look at the Q1, so the stage 1 complaints, you will see there are certain areas where the resolution rate is relatively high. So I think, when you sort of take Q4, for example, at stage 2, 7 related to failure to provide an acceptable service, 2 were breach of condition, 2 were heating, hot water, 2 were tenancy, and then there were 10 services that had 1 complaint at stage 2. So, taking sort of my areas of experience, sort of in terms of my services, planning committees make a difference. We will see sometimes complaints following council meetings. So you tend to have those trigger points for the more sort of day-to-day services, as you'll see from these numbers there in terms of what's listed, things like banding disputes, enforcement. These are the sort of areas we're seeing coming up repeatedly. Merits of decision for planning is another issue. So I think we need to do more to look at where we've had this spike. As you say, it's up by about 35%. In effect, we've sort of taken 5 quarters in 1 year in terms of stage 2 complaints compared to previous years. One of the things we're looking to do for Q1 is analyse where we are with stage 2 complaints to see whether we are reverting back to the 1 in 6 or whether the 1 in 4 is the sort of metric going forward. And out of that, we're looking to do some more analysis to try and work out in Q1 whether this is a trend that is going forward or whether this was just a sort of 1 year blip.
Councillor Vincent.
Thank you. I feel like should we be apologising for making unpopular decisions? Planning committee, I don't know. I mean, on the plus side, I suppose 50 complaints about that application is fewer complaints than the number of houses that were permitted. So, yeah. On slightly more serious matters, I'd like to understand. I mean, it looks to me like if I'm looking at the detail of which service areas are generating most complaints over the last year. And there's a good news story here, which is that our waste services team seems to be sort of dropping down the league table quarter on quarter. But what I don't have, I suppose, is a comparison of previous years to understand whether or not they always have a spike in Q1. It'd be useful to understand if there's something materially that's happened that we should be celebrating, or is it a seasonal effect?
We tend to find in Q1 green waste complaints tend to spike as people renew their green waste arrangements. That has traditionally been where it is. We'll obviously see if that's the case for Q1 this time around, but that has in 24-25, it was green waste that spiked Q1.
Thank you. I had a feeling that might be the answer, because I know that previously, particularly issues around like the method of payment and the admin around renewing that have caused some frustration among residents. There's just two other quick ones. So the term failure to provide acceptable service is a fairly broad one. I guess it risks being a kind of other catch-all. Now, given that it sort of topped the league table for reasons for complaints in every single quarter, is one of the things that we need to do to break that down a bit better, because it doesn't really give us much, and I'm sure it doesn't give officers much to go on when it comes to identifying what that really means. And I don't know whether or not we have a list of categories that we are choosing from that perhaps means that the list needs to be expanded a bit to help people in the team provide a bit more richness in information. Is that something that we are looking at, or are these all a failure that could be some sort of, is it something you could explain, perhaps Rebecca, through you, Chairman, that would maybe make it a bit more sense?
You're absolutely right. When we had the 85 categories, we initially went with obviously we cover a wide variety, but we've discovered that wasn't enough. We've gone to 92 now to add in a number more. And one of the things that we want to look at further is failure to provide acceptable service is one we want to look at. And there was one around sort of breaking down. I think it was, there's a repairs one where we have 2 repairs categories in there that we want to look at slightly more. So as we have sort of heating, hot water, for example, as a category that we want to sort of look at breaking that down a bit further to give more detail. So that won't be something we'll be able to deliver for Q1's report, but we are looking for Q2 to try and bring in a wider category. And obviously it's not cast in stone. So if we find that we're still not sort of, as you say, sort of drilling that down into further detail, we can then look to change further. We do through the complaint system, so I can pull up a list of all failure to provide acceptable service complaints for a quarter, and I can actually read what the nature of the complaint is. So we are able to look and sort of try and identify reasons and themes coming out of those sort of messages from the complainants. So something we're on trying to sort, but it is going to take probably till the end of Q2 to get it sort of reported. So Q1 will have still failure to provide acceptable service as a reason, but by Q2 we should see that broken down further.
Is the plan for that to be similar to bin, where you've got bin something, because there is miscellaneous, so there is an other. So it will still be failure to provide, but it will be what type of failure to provide. Okay, so we'll still see failure. Yeah, so it will look like bin, missed bin, whatever. Okay, Councillor Vincent.
Thank you, Chairman. Just final one from me. So my understanding is that the complaints reporting that we undertake is a requirement. So I am assuming that because it's a requirement, then it's possible to benchmark our performance against other similar authorities. I don't think that's in the report, but it would be useful to understand whether or not we've undertaken that assessment so that we can see whether or not we're getting more or less complaints about what are very common services across councils to help us guide either the praise or critique of our own officers.
Through you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, at the moment we've been sort of benchmarking with the Ombudsman findings against neighbours. So those members here that are on the governance committee will remember that when we did the year-end report, we talked about sort of Ombudsman outcomes in terms of our immediate neighbours and how we perform. One of the things that we do with this report is we're now reporting on the full suite of indicators that the Housing Ombudsman in its statutory guidance identifies and the local government Ombudsman in its non-statutory guidance identifies. So that should allow, assuming authorities are reporting against those indicators, for us to look to apply comparable benchmarks. What I would say, of course, is that what it won't sort of show necessarily is the amount of resources being used in each authority in those areas, which has always been the sort of issue. If you have a team of 3 people at one authority and 300 another doing the same task, you may well see sort of some differences in performance, but it should allow in more general terms us to sort of benchmark, yes.
there are, correct me if I'm wrong, Rebecca, please, but I think there are 2 tenant satisfaction measures relating to complaints that we're required to report on. So that won't be reported till end of June, July type time, but we would then therefore from a housing point of view be able to compare ourselves with kind of local authorities, housing associations, etc. And that looks at the number of complaints received per 1,000 residents, for example, and the number that get escalated to stage 1 and stage 2. So that kind of data we should be able to benchmark on fairly soon and very easily. It will be low as well. I mean, we do, compared to our peers, I would say, as members have already mentioned, we're getting a fairly low number of complaints, so we will appear good, I would suggest.
Yeah, and I believe the housing team actually do publicise those information when it comes out as part of their reporting on sort of measures to tenants, etc. So yeah, so part of the reason we've introduced the monthly figure reporting before you is because we were capturing that anyway for the housing team. So it seemed not an opportunity to use that as well to demonstrate sort of monthly as well as quarterly fluctuations.
Councillor Rose and then Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. We've already gone over complaints that you may have missed or haven't been reported. To give you an example, I've had one recently where elderly resident wasn't able to engage online, engaged with them with Veolia, collection not done, they're going on holiday, got really stressed out about it. Sent the photographs in, Veolia just binned it off, said no, it's not happened, because they hadn't applied online. Now that to me is just unacceptable. Not only are you reaching out and giving the evidence, but then they just binned it off going, no, it's not been reported. So I said, they're elderly, they can't do it. Don't care, still need a report. So you have a situation there where vulnerable people, some dyslexic or elderly, just not engaging online, cannot report, and you don't hear about it. I think that needs looking at.
One of the things I would always say is if members have complaints put to them by their constituents, we would ask you to get in contact with the complaints team if you feel that they're not being progressed, and we can have a look at it to see if it's been registered on the system and if it's progressing through the system. If it's something that's come to you that hasn't been registered with us as a complaint, then we can use your contact with your constituent to add it into the complaint system and get it progressed through.
Good.
And this is something we talked about previously, that some of the missed complaints were ones where people have complained directly to an officer, and if it hasn't, if you're getting hundreds and hundreds of emails or whatever and you miss the deadline, that's unfortunate, isn't it? But that's fine, that's our measuring metric. But for councillors, obviously we're not included in that, but that shouldn't stop us trying to support people and helping them make that complaint, because we know that happens. They either phone us or catch us in the street, possibly. Councillor Williams and then Councillor Mamjo.
Thank you, Chair. Page 188, 8.3. I'm a bit confused about what these terms mean. Can you tell me what determination means? And I think I can probably work out maladministration. What's an order and what's a service failure, please?
So the Ombudsman uses a set of defined terms. I can probably provide you, if you're happy. The website has a list of what each of these means. If I could send those to you, that would probably answer that. I'm happy to obviously offline talk about the complaint in a bit more detail if you want, but obviously it does relate to personal data, so I have to be a little careful and talk about it in general. In terms of the complaints, obviously, if the Ombudsman makes a decision, we will obviously conform with that decision. We will do the actions required. The important thing with the Housing Ombudsman is that we believe that we're actually below the reporting threshold this year for an Ombudsman report for the council. Last year we had a report, that was what I presented to the Governance Committee in December. This year we believe that we're below the threshold for a report being generated, which is a positive step forward.
Very positive. Thank you.
Sorry, just to elaborate. So in relation to the first complaint on page 188. I would say there were two determinations. One was that there was maladministration, and the other one was that there was service failure. They're the two. Yeah, and then there were 3 instructions for us to complete, orders. Is that fair, Rebecca? Am I getting that right? Good.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mamjan.
Just going to complaints about the time frame. I have a concern about the time frame of reporting Veolia. What's the word I'm looking for? Failures, and it's only 24 hours. There are a lot of people who don't complain within that time frame. They're elderly. They wait for someone else to operate the computer for them. They don't know where to go. It's complicated for them, and I was just wondering, I mean, can we extend that time? Because it was longer before, and then it got reduced to within 24 hours. That's probably one of the reasons why we don't have more complaints, because people don't manage to complain. And amongst them are not just mist bins, but also where rubbish is strewn over because they're doing it so quickly. It's like seconds almost, and then they throw bins, the bins are broken, and if you do complain literally an hour over the 24 hours, it just says that, I don't know, I can't remember the phrase that comes up. Yeah, time's up, but it's not quite that, but yes. And I think that should be extended.
So there's 2 things here. One is the reporting thresholds and time limits for reporting a misbin, which is through Veolia and the contract there. The other is the complaints process, which is not related to that. So you can report a complaint outside of 24 hours. You can engage with us through that. That's not a problem. The 24-hour thing is related to waste services, so you'd need to speak to Ian about that, and he can explain why that is as it is, unless Andy's got anything to add.
Go at that. Sorry, Chair, can I have a go at that if that's helpful? So I think, and we do need to get some proper clarity on this, but I think the 24 hours is to enable the service to go and pick the bin back up. So it needs to be quickly reported. And that's why it needs to be done online. And I think that's contractual. That's built into our contract that they have 24. We have the ability to go back to them within 24 hours and get them to collect a missed bin. So that's why it would be slightly more, well, quite tricky to amend, because it's built into the Veolia contract.
That's fine. So if it's a missed bin, so then they have to go this convoluted way of actually complaining to council, waiting for a response, and then someone coming. But what I don't understand, that it was longer before. You had, several days to complain directly, via the thing directly to Veolia. Why was it? If it could be reduced, it could be increased again.
So obviously we talk about complaints, but also something called a service request, which is something hasn't worked. You make your initial contact. Service requests, we know from the ones for waste that come through to us, are dealt with exceptionally quickly. So if that contact is made with the council, the waste team are really good at, once they get those service requests, in resolving them, has been our experience. So I would say that the important thing is that obviously if you can't do the online reporting, that you contact the council, whether it be through phoning up the switchboard, whether it be through using the complaints portal. Service requests passed on, they are resolved pretty quickly, we found, and that I think bears through in terms of the complaints at stage 1, which you see dropping off in terms of the waste complaints. I think Andy may have something else to add.
Sorry, Chair, just to sort of hammer that point home, if we've missed a bin, or if Veolia have missed a bin and someone's complaining, that isn't actually a complaint. That's, as Rebecca describes, a service request, because we need within the process there's the ability to put right an issue before it becomes a complaint. So even though the person might be saying I'm complaining, that's actually categorized as a service request. If we don't respond to that service request appropriately and someone contacts us, that becomes a complaint, and that, as Rebecca says, can be done outside of the 24 hours. Whenever's appropriate.
but by all means make representations to Ian about waste services. I'm sure he will be happy to hear your concerns. Okay, are we happy to note the report then? Happy to note? Yeah, good. Okay, that brings us to the end of our meeting then. Thank you, councillors, officers, and those people who are watching at home. Thank you very much.